And in a time where seemingly every card game dives full in on randomness to attract collectors, Singularity stands apart. While others are adding booster packs, random draws, and exclusive runs, Octothorpe is focused on making the best game they can, reducing all randomness entirely from Singularity. This also makes it a stellar deck building game, since you can craft exactly how your deck will play. But does that make it too boring? Or is there more to Singularity than just a staunch stance against randomness in card games? Today I'd love to help answer these questions for you, so without further ado, here is my review of Singularity by Octothorpe. First, let's get some disclaimers out of the way and also talk a bit about the actual gameplay. This review is based on a prototype provided by Octothorpe. Prototypes for board games are interesting because some are barely held together and shallow experiences, whereas others can be exactly like the finished product, but with more handmade components. Singularity is the latter of these for the most part. The prototype includes all cards before any potential stretch goals and seems to be rules complete. The only noteworthy aspect is that the rulebook itself is a bit rough around the edges still. Rest assured though that I was in contact with the developer to make sure I played the game correctly just in case I missed something from the work in progress rulebook. Singularity is primarily played as a 2-player game but can support 3+ players with very minimal rule adjustments. 2v2 and free-for-all allow this. Note, however, that I only played the 2-player version, but saw no issues with the other ways to play it as it really only changes how scoring works and not much else. Also note that the name of the game is technically Singularity.exe, but saying .exe each time is dumb, so I and most others will simply say Singularity when referring to the game. Okay, so let's go over the game itself and how it plays. Note that this is a quick rundown of the major rules and there are more mechanics I'm not mentioning. However, also note that the game is very easy to teach and play and not an overly complex card game by any means. My kids were able to play this fine without help. The world of Singularity takes place in a future where humans live entirely in the digital realm. As such, the weapons of choice are programs, and every card you play from a character is a program, either a command or a patch. You'll have 5 characters that form your squad, each with 3 programs at their disposal. Every character has a unique ability or effect. You'll have 3 active characters at a time and 2 inactive characters. One of the key elements of the game is swapping out characters either because one of yours crashed, i.e. they are out of the game, or because you choose to swap them in. These can sometimes have an ambush ability when swapped in this way that can be used to your advantage. You can sometimes produce additional RAM called virtual RAM that goes away if unused that turn and does not come back next round. If you should ever gain more than 10 max RAM, you gain an overload token and your characters receive a damage for each of these you have. So the game ends pretty quick if it ever gets to that point. Of note, in all the games I've played, I've not gotten to that point. So you pay the RAM cost of the program, and then that program goes in the middle of the board where each player can react to it. Once both are finished, it's then implemented. A command program does its effect and is then returned to the bottom of the character stack that used it. A patch, however, is attached to a character, sometimes to the character that cast it, other times to an ally, and yet others to an opponent character. Usually patches have some effect that is now part of that character, but can also come with an ability that is activated by choice. These are either a reaction ability or an EXE ability. Either way, once one of those abilities are used, the patch is returned to the bottom of the stack of programs of the character that originally cast it. You win the game by crashing 3 of your opponent characters. You do this attacking them with programs which may deal one of 4 types of damage: power, corruption, AI, and health. All of them result in damage to the opponent's health, but certain types of damage may have buffs or debuffs to them, except health. Health is always straight damage. And really that's the gist of it. You use up your RAM each turn, then the other player goes and uses up theirs, rinse and repeat until a winner is crowned. So let's get to the review portion of the video then. I'll start off with art, as I feel that is an integral part of any card game. Now art is subjective, but personally I love the art both in style and in direction. It's a bit anime and a bit cyberpunk and even a bit of late 80s, early 90s retro feel to some of it, mostly in the music themed cards. Thankfully, the art remains respectfully done and never gets, shall I say, too anime, if you know what I mean. Characters have actual character to them, and similar mechanics have visuals that mesh well together. This means that playing a themed deck is doubly enjoyable, both mechanically and visually. Your street-smart, music-loving squad will fight against a more Asian-inspired stealth squad, and you'll look and play the part. I really appreciate this aspect of the game once actually played. I also really appreciate the RAM ramp-up, a system that ensures you'll always have something to do while also still being able to play around with it some. You can, for instance, build a RAM ramp-up deck to gain even more through virtual RAM, or even give up your max RAM and field nothing but low-cost cards. I'll speak more in deck building later on in this video, but I wanted to highlight the RAM system separately as an enjoyable part of the experience. The overload system as well is a nice bit of insurance to know that the game won't last too long, and also helps push people to be more aggressive, which is something most competitive games can struggle with, where certain players tend to want to turtle up and keep buffing and setting up and not attacking until towards the end. You can still do this, it's a viable strategy, but it puts the pressure on in such cases and is enjoyable. I never had this happen, and we always ended the game prior to round 10, though it got close a few times. There is rarely a bit of awkwardness in the setup of the game. For instance, one specific character can use the top or bottom of their deck, but there's no real pleasant way to do this beyond laying all 3 cards out so you see them, and then swapping the cards around from top to bottom can be a chore. The 4 different damage types were also a great addition. Keeping this in mind really helps out with the deck building, both in synergies for your own cards and buffs and debuffs to damage, which are always based on the type, and for a variety and possibilities to keep your opponent on their toes. Not just because it's neat to build interesting decks, but because those interesting decks then enhance the actual gameplay. As such, I'm going to dive into this pretty heavily. Right off the bat, know that you can build a bad deck. I feel that's important, however. If all decks were good, then that tends to mean there's not a lot of variety. But in Singularity, it's a bit heavier than most in this regard. I'll explain. There is, of course, the typical mistakes players can make when building a deck, such as not including any cards that deal damage, or not including many synergies, or including all really expensive cards or really cheap cards to the detriment of their survivability. But Singularity is different than most deck building games because there is no luck, and in this case, that means an increase in options to the player every turn. What this essentially does is make your entire deck one giant combo deck. While you can play without this, the better players will use this to their advantage. Most games have you draw a card and then use those cards drawn as your options for play, which means usually you have around 5-ish cards you could play and some abilities on some cards. In Singularity, however, every time you use a card, it goes to the bottom of the deck, revealing the card under it. The card you purposely picked to be under that exact card. So you could then play that card too. This means every time you play a card, you now have access to a new card choice. You also can swap out characters revealing their cards that weren't available from the start. So your turn might go something like this. Play a card from the top of stack 1 to place a patch debuff on your opponent's 3rd character. The patch makes it to where they can no longer use a reaction command that they had available that would debuff your damage type. With them pacified, you reveal the 2nd card from stack 1, which you knew would be there. It's another patch, this time a buff for another character that enhances their damage. Now you know your inactive character has a card in their stack you want to use, so you swap out your 2nd character for them. The swapped in character has an ambush that activates and deals a damage to each opponent's character. This is straight health damage and could not be avoided by them. However, the swapped in character is then suspended, so you have to spend some RAM to make them active again. After doing that, you can then apply the patch to them from that previous stack of the card that was just shown after your first patch. And then after doing that, you can now activate the new characters program, which deals damage based on a multiple of the amount of patches the opponent has on them. So your patch you added not only removes the ability to debuff this attack, but also actually helps to add to the attack, working against them in 2 different ways. Now you can obviously play Singularity without doing all of that, but I hope this fake example helps highlight the types of combos at your disposal to play better. If you had not played those specific cards in that very specific order, your damage output would have been considerably less. In fact, if you had not, before the game even started, purposely set the cards in just the right order for this to even be able to happen, then it would not have been possible. But instead, you knew the exact turn number when that combo was available to you. That is, unless you're reacting to what the opponent is doing, which is something you should probably do. Honestly, I can't express how enjoyable this type of card combo deck building and implementation is to me. I can sit there and theory craft about a deck to my heart's content, and then every single time I play the deck, it'll play out just as I made it. One of my largest complaints about deck-based games, whether you build the deck before the game or during it, is the times when the randomness means you don't get it to work how you crafted it. You just happen to get a bad hand, and now the options you should have aren't available. This never happens in Singularity, and every single turn is based more on who is the better player, not who has the best luck. Of course, all of this can lead to a really heavy analysis paralysis for some players, and indeed, even though you set the deck up yourself, until you get a few plays into it, there can typically be some thinking involved once it's your turn, especially when adjusting to your opponent's plays. If you have a player that's prone to AP, definitely avoid Singularity or be patient with them. Deck building has a huge variety in Singularity as well, so you won't tire from even the core box for a long while. Of course, each game session is different, even with the same decks. It's not as different as a random game, which makes sense. For the most part, your deck will perform how it performs, especially against a similar deck, though of course player choices can still factor in. However, there are a ton of characters to choose from, each with a unique ability of their own, and assigning programs in different orders or to different characters further changes things. Along with this is the cards themselves. Cards do a large amount of different things, and you can theme all in one aspect or only just a bit. How well does an armor and healing combo deck work? Build one to find out. What about a ramp one? Or one that only has cheap programs and is constantly removing max RAM for various effects? Try it out and see. There really is a large variety you can work with that seem interesting to me. Additionally, reacting to your opponent of course matters as well. You might plan a certain combo that your deck can do, but when that character's dead, you can't do that combo anymore. Now you have to react. Now you have to be on your toes. So a versatile deck is ideal. Do note though that deck building, because the order is determined by you exactly, is more complex than many other games. You have a lot to think through, not just what cards to pick, but what character to assign them to and in what exact order they should go into. So the deck building portion is not for casual gamers, at least not fully. You can certainly put whatever in the deck, but again, recall you can build bad decks if you aren't careful. Have no Ram 1 cards in the first position of your starting characters? Now you get to do nothing turn 1. That being said, there are pre-built decks for each faction included to alleviate this. In fact, it gets better. Not only does each faction have a fully pre-made deck out of the box, but each faction also has 3 other partial decks. These decks have a theme and card list, but it doesn't make a full deck, so you are free to accentuate it with cards of your choice and also get to choose the characters and order of it all. This is a nice way to gradually get into the deck building side of things for players. Now, a few last things to note. I wish the program cards were a bit brighter. Each of them is great looking, but surrounded by darkness, and sometimes even the art in the black darkness isn't very bright. I'd also like to see in the final version a component list that shows an image of the components, and of course an index and a few rules clarified in the text better. I'm sure these will be added, but now is the time for feedback, so I thought I'd provide it. One last thing that I wanted to mention that I enjoyed are the Singularity fragments. In the lore, this is something every faction wants, but in the game, it's simply a really cool achievement system to push you to play different aspects of the game, such as new factions or certain different game mechanics. Not only do I love this style of thing in board games, since achievements have proven so popular in video games, it makes sense, I feel, to add them more to board games in an official capacity, but there's a reward to it as well. Once you get all the fragments, you get to open up a secret pack containing who knows what that relates to the next phase of Singularity. You can of course open this whenever you wish. The game police won't break down your door if you open it right away, but I think it's a great idea to add some fun and even further longevity to the game. To put it simply, I've loved every single moment of my time with Singularity, and I think if you enjoy chunky deck building, great art, and strategic gameplay, then you'll love it too. Every day I didn't play this game, my family asked to play it again, and I feel that says all I need to hear about whether or not I should get this game. At the time of posting this review, the game is available now on GameFound with a base price of $55. I feel that's a fantastic deal for a game that stands uniquely on my shelf, and I look forward to seeing what more the game has to offer as the campaign continues. Of course, that campaign is linked in the description of this video. I hope this video helped to make the right decision for you on whether Singularity is a good fit for your game collection. If it was, I'd really appreciate you letting me know either with a comment or a thumbs up. Reviews like this, where I spend a lot of time with the game prior to writing up the script and filming it, all takes up a great deal of time that I wouldn't be able to justify without my amazing YouTube members and patrons. If you'd like to join either of those lists, again, those links are also in the description below. Guys, thank you so much for watching my review of Singularity, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.